All right, and we are live. So yeah, this is Juska. Is that how you pronounce it?
PacingJouska, but also just Dino is fine.
Cool. And I think your main claim to fame is the Tetsi podcast. Is that right?
The End Times Continue. That's a show that I do with the wonderful and beautiful Asarchist. Yeah, it's a lot of fun for us. We do it weekly. Yeah.
Nice. And so you wanted to discuss the group property argument that I've been bringing up a lot. Do you want to sort of like elaborate on what your sort of contention with that would be?
Well, look, I know you've done this a million times, and I hate to ask you to do it again, but just to start from zero and just like make sure that we're using the same definitions and working from the same sort of place. Could you just real basically nutshell your position on it, and then I can nutshell mine?
Sure. So basically the idea is that if we assume that there's a group property right, A through Z, all owning a stick, that that makes it impossible to deal with any conflicts over the use of that stick within the set. So if we imagine that A wants to use the stick to spearfish, and B doesn't want this to happen, well, either the spearfishing happens or it doesn't. And our legal theory therefore has two options here. It can either say, yeah, the spearfishing should go ahead, or it can say it should not go ahead. If we say that it should go ahead, that would mean that A owns it and B doesn't own it, because B didn't have the right to control it. And vice versa for if the spearfishing does go ahead on our legal theory. And both options are contradicting the presumption that everybody owns it. Contradictions are false, so the initial assumption is wrong, basically.
Okay. I think I see that, and you correct me if I'm wrong, but I understand that our primary contention, or point of contention rather, our primary disagreement is on the legitimacy of transfer of a title interest within a co-exclusive set. So, for example, the transfer, if you and I were to go into business together and I transferred to you 1/2 interest in a commercial property I own in exchange for your interest in an order of widgets to get us started producing something, then those transfers themselves have to be illegitimate. Is that the sort of baseline contention that you have?
So I haven't heard this specific terminology, but I like interesting, meaning like, where it becomes more valuable over time and I'm trading that somehow.
No, I'm sorry. 1/2 ownership interest, 1/2 co-exclusive control with me.
Okay, so yeah, I would say that it's not legitimate to have a contract where you define, okay, I'm transferring this stick to this group. I think that is illegitimate because contract theory is not antecedent to property theory. You can't just have arbitrary contracts.
I agree with you. Okay, so this is my contention. Just to nutshell my position here. I think that property title, once it has arisen in an owner, okay, is infinitely divisible. And by that I mean that owner can give interests away to whomever he wants. And that those interests can include full rights of ownership, co-exclusive with the original owner. That those interests can give somebody else all the rights that an owner would have. Now, contract theory, I understand it not being I understand it being kind of not really part and parcel of property theory, but I think it has to be in cases like this because what you're transferring is title, and that's part of property theory. Does that make sense?
Sure, and the way I would say it is that contract theory descends from property theory rather than the other way around. I disagree with this notion of, like, it seems like you're going for a property right being like a bundle of rights where I can, kind of strip off whatever individual rights from that property theory, from that property right. But this just isn't like borne out from first principles. You have a property right because you want to avoid conflicts over a specific item, and that means that, okay, you have the right to exclude people. Now, it's fine enough to say, okay, and I will let you sleep on my couch or something. But the way we get to a contract is, if I'm trading something to you, I can't trade, like, the blueness of something, the painting blueness of my wall, because there isn't a painting blueness in the wall that I can abandon and give up to you to use at any time you wish. I can abandon the entire wall, I can give up that entire thing, and you can take it in at the same time, but I can't strip out individual activities which could be done with the property in question. Does that make sense?
To drill down on that just a little bit, the idea of, okay, first of all, I think I caused a little confusion because I was very I wasn't super accurate with the words that I chose. So I suppose what I'm describing when I say individual acts that can be taken with property that I own are things like easements, right? Which you can contract for. Would you agree with that?
The contract would have to be something like, I let you drive over my property or something, and if I stop you, then I have to pay a penalty fee. I don't think I can actually trade the right to drive over my property.
Okay. Yeah. Well, we agree there has to be consideration, and we agree that there has to be equal, like an equal transfer of value either direction, right? Something of value has to be given in order for something of value to be taken, right?
Mm-hmm. But to be abundantly clear, I don't think, even in that case, I don't think that the right to drive over the property is being traded, because I don't think you can trade that.
I'm not sure why, because to me it seems like the functional and even like metaphysical aspect of what's being traded there is, I am giving up the fact that I have the right to keep you off of this to you specifically. I am giving up that right, and you are gaining. It's almost like if I invite you into my house, I'm giving up the right to keep you out for whatever period the invitation stands, and you have a right to enter. Does that make sense?
Sure, but I don't think that's a trade. At any point, I would still be allowed to say, all right, I don't want this situation anymore, get out. I would say that you can drive over my lawn as much as you want. That's just a promise at that point. Because I don't think I can trade specific activities to be done with the property.
Okay. I think we disagree on that too, but that's okay, because that's kind of ancillary to the actual argument. So I should keep that out, that idea of stripping out particular things, and just talk about title in whole. All the rights of title, right? Which, just so we're working from the same term, if you have legitimate title to a thing, we would, I believe, both conceive that as having the right to possess that thing exclusive of the rest of the world. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay. My position on this is, I think it's best illustrated like this, okay? And I've heard you use the example of painting the wall, right? Somebody wants to paint the wall, somebody else doesn't want the wall painted. I'd like to adopt that actually a little bit, but I'd like to change it. And I'd like to say that it's not painting the wall, it's tearing the wall down. Let's say you and I made a partnership agreement to produce something. We produce widgets, you and me, we're in business producing widgets. And in our in our warehouse, there's a wall, and the general law of partnership, and probably our partnership contract between each other, would say that any material changes to the property that of the partnership would have to be unanimously decided. You want to tear a wall out of the warehouse, and I don't. There's a wall you don't like there, and I like the wall. Okay. Now we've introduced a conflict. Can you sort of explain from your position what happens now?
Sure. So if I wanted to tear that wall down, if we are working on the assumption that we both own the wall, then, there are two ways we could go about this, and they contradict each other. Let's say our legal theory through whatever mechanism says that, through the mechanism described here is that there has to be unanimous agreement, then I'm not allowed to tear the wall down. Well, that means I'm not allowed to control it. I'm not allowed to possess the wall exclusive of everybody else. I'm certainly not allowed to possess it exclusive of you. So that is where the issue lies. The way that such a contract would have to be set up is that one of us actually owns the wall, and that if the partnership, degrades or something and we can no longer work together, then the person who owns the wall, it could be set up that they pay the other guy some damages or whatever. And you can do that with contracts. That's fine.
Okay. I'm very glad you said that. Because that goes both directions. Okay. And by that, I mean this. Let's say I want to keep the wall and you want to tear it down. Okay. Any material changes to our property has to be unanimously decided. I'm the one who's saying I don't want it torn down. Okay. I'm the one who's standing in the way of a material change, which means that if our contract is valid, and if in fact we do both have a divided interest, but a divided but whole interest in the ownership, okay, then you have to buy my assent. We could agree that in a separate contract, for example, we could agree that I get a certain percentage amount over what I'm entitled to from the business for a year, or you could pay me out of your personal funds, or I could get to do something with the property that I've wanted to do for a while that you were saying no to. Right? So you have to, that unanimity requirement doesn't change. And that to me is what evinces that the ownership is legitimate both directions, is because you still need the unanimity. You just have to buy it now.
Sure, but I'm not buying it off of the group or something there, because I don't think the group owned it at any point there. It would rather be like, maybe I actually legitimately do own the wall, but if we come to a disagreement and there isn't unanimous decision there, then you fuck off and I get to do what I want with the wall. But then on that condition, I agree to pay you 50 grams of gold or whatever.
Sure.
Yeah. So
but that's kind of what I'm saying is evidence of the unanimity. You're buying me out of my interest in that wall. You're buying back full title to that wall from me.
I'm not buying, so in an economic sense, you might be able to describe it that way, that they both have shares in the wall. But in the strict legal sense, it has to be that only one person actually owns the wall. Because if we actually did both own the wall, then there wouldn't be any such thing as requiring unanimity. You don't require agreement with anybody else to do what you want with your property, right? You can just do whatever the hell you want. Now, it might be that you promised that I'll consult you, but that doesn't really matter in terms of the law.
I understand where you're coming from. I don't see that follows. I don't see that, because what I do with my property, right, that is an exclusive decision-making process for myself. But let's say, for example, that I have given someone the spare bedroom on my house. I didn't give them the ownership of anything. I'm letting them stay there for an indeterminate period of time, or even by contract for a year or something like that. I can't just go tear down that spare bedroom, right? So there are contracts I can make that limit my ability to do what I will with my property. And that's what I'm describing here.
Well, I would say you would be allowed to tear down that spare bedroom at any point. If I said, well, Jeff, you can stay here for a year, that's all well and good. And then I find out a week later that my friend Jeff was actually Jeff Epstein the whole time. And it's like, well, you know what? I don't want this guy staying here any longer. I'd be allowed to say, no, get out, right? It might be, I break my promise.
But I would say though that would be, I think you'd be able to find some fraud there that was committed that would delegitimize the contract. I'm assuming the contract is legitimate.
But what was traded?
I mean, he's paying rent. I'm sorry, I wasn't clear about that. Let's just say he's paying rent, right? So now you have a value. Now you have value for exchange.
Right. So if he's paying rent on that room, right, then it would be something like Jeff agrees to transfer to Liquid Zulu on the first of the month every month, $1,000, whatever.
Sure.
The way he isn't actually gaining title in that specific, on like the naive version of the contract, on the condition that he has been allowed to stay there for the entire preceding month, then he transfers to Liquid Zulu the $1,000. That's a naive way you could do it, but obviously then on day one, after he's already moved in, I could just say, no, get out. And then he wouldn't owe me the $1,000 at the end of the month. Because you can't trade for... It couldn't be the case that on the condition that he will stay here for the rest of this month, he transfers, because that's future-oriented, right? It doesn't work that way. So one way you could do it, if you wanted to have the payments be on the first of the month, is that you have like a drop-off or something. If he only is allowed to stay there for a week, then I agree to transfer to him the remainder of that month's check, right?
Sure, right. You would owe him, right, for the value that you accepted but did not give in return per the contract.
But only if it's explicitly stated. If there's like an explicit thing in there which says, on the condition that I kick him out early, I agree to transfer to him some specified sum.
Sure. The remainder of that month or whatever it is that he paid that he didn't get to utilize. Mm-hmm. That's fair. The point that I'm making, though, is that I can limit myself in what I can do with my property by contract. Like I can do that, and in order for that to not be in order for me to go back on one of those limitations, I have to break the contract, or the contract has to be otherwise destroyed. We have to exit the deal, right?
Well,
so my point is that so long as a contract is legitimate, I can say that I don't get to do certain things with my property.
So I would say, in this case, if I kick him out early, I haven't broken the contract. I don't think there's such a thing as breaking a contract. I'm just obeying the contract. I'm going with some specified term that, on the condition that I kick him out early, then I agree to transfer to him title to whatever remaining sum, right? So I'm not actually...
Sure. I'm not saying you're necessarily in breach. I'm just saying you're closing the deal. You're exiting the deal.
Yeah, but there, I'm not actually like limiting what I can do with my property. At any point, I am allowed to kick him out for any reason, right? I'd be allowed to kick him out if I just didn't like the way he looked anymore, that would all be fine. It's just that then I've agreed that if that happens, I've like made a bet that if that happens, then I've got to pay up because I no longer own that money, assuming the money exists, of course.
Right. Sure. And that money would, I mean, even then though, you're saying that you owe him property if you were to do this certain thing under the contract, right?
That's right, because it's no longer my property. The instant that condition is met, title becomes his. It's his property at that point. It's just like if I, buy a hot dog for $5, right? It's the same situation, but that doesn't mean that I'm limiting what I can do with my $5. I'm just trading it. And like,
I don't see how those things can work concurrently. Does that make sense? Because if what we're saying is that ownership as a held title, okay, is inalienable to a certain extent. In terms of what you're allowed to do while owning it.
So inalienable in the sense that
how it becomes alienable. I'm sorry, continue.
So would it be inalienable in the sense that I can't strip individual things off from that property title, but I mean, or inalienable in the sense that I can't trade it, like the title as a whole?
That you can't limit yourself in any way with regard to it, right? You own it or you don't. It's on or off. Yeah,
I mean, you could decide to not exercise whatever you want, but you'd still ultimately have that right to exercise.
Okay. I think what our disagreement is more semantic than anything else, because a contract is a relationship of rights and duties. It's for every right, and I don't mean natural right or natural law right. I mean a right that's contracted for. For every right that a person contracts for, there's a corresponding duty, and usually that duty is to pay money, but it can be for other things as well. And we agree that under libertarian title theory, there is no contract which is legitimate that doesn't have the exchange of title. Okay, so I'm not saying anything at all, but just anything within that construct, within that framework.
I would go further and say that all the contract is defining transfers of title. And there might be certain conditions you could dream up crazy conditions for it.
Yeah, it's conditioned upon the rights and duties that are there. If the rights and duties aren't met, then the title doesn't transfer, or different title has to transfer. Let's say you have an agreement for liquidated damages in the case of a breach. Well, now you're transferring different title to something else because somebody didn't perform their duty. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So to me, then it makes sense that I would be able to say, for example, I'm doing it right now. The idea that my wife and I starting our partnership, starting our business, okay, that our partnership agreement says that we are operating as a general partnership. This has certain assumptions with it, but along with that comes the understanding that we each have a 50% interest in the organization that we have formed together. Okay.
Yeah.
That we have a 50% ownership interest in it.
Yeah, I would say that contract is invalid.
Okay.
Unless it's specifically
what is the base reason for that.
So
I'm sorry. What's the specificity it needs?
So the way you'd have to get something like that working is in complete autistic title transfer terms, where one of you actually owns it. It could be you or your wife, doesn't matter. All of that property, which the business is about, because again, businesses aren't property; they are just sets of contracts. Whether it's like a house or a warehouse or a factory or whatever it is, somebody would have to own each of those individual things, and you could have it set up such that, if there is a disagreement over how it's to be used, if somebody's going against the shareholders' wishes or whatever, then on that condition being met, they could give up all the property to the other partner, or they could have to give up a certain amount of it. You could define which assets go where, and then the entire thing just completely amicably splits. It's like this was in Atlas Shrugged. Midas Mulligan, the most civilized bank run in history. He had figured out titles to everything, and everyone got paid out and all that. It's you're not gonna, under a system of proper contract, have any situation where there is one where you don't know who owns a specific thing, where there's title held in a specific thing, 50% by one person, 50% by another, because you can't have a 50% property right in something.
Okay. I still think that the contract legitimizes that. And the reason that I think that is because let's say you're tearing down the wall in our warehouse that our business owns, or that we own operating as a business, whatever terminology you want to use, because there are two different theories on that in law, and one of them is wrong and the other one is not. But that we're using this warehouse. We have this warehouse. The warehouse is, in a sense, ours, right? Because each of us agreed that we have 50% interest in it. Well, under our contract. If you tear out the wall, I'm sorry.
I don't like the sort of we agreed to have 50%. It's like, well, what if we agree that, we're going to have fractional reserve? Well, it doesn't matter if we agree or not, because property theory fundamentally is just at the root. You have the NEP, and then from the NEP you get property theory, and then from property theory you get contract theory. So you can't just have, we'll agree to have whatever property arrangement we want, and we want to have 50% owning the wall. That doesn't work. It has to be one of us owns it, because to assume otherwise is a contradiction.
Okay, I understand that aspect of it, but I don't see why it has to be a contradiction. I just don't see that.
So
I don't see why I can't bring a third party into the fold on my control of a thing, such that they have equal rights in the thing that I do.
well, because you can't trade, you can't have the bundle of property thing where you trade off individual things that you can do with the wall. So we're left with then is the entire property right. It's like, okay, well, maybe we both just have that property right. We both have the right to control it, but then, property rights only matter because there can be a thing called conflict. So let's imagine what would happen if there was a conflict. Well, it's going to go one way or the other. Either I get to say what I want done with it, or I don't, right? And both options contradict the presumption that both of us own it.
See, I don't see the contradiction, because if our agreement is that we have to have mutual assent to a material change in the partnership assets, okay? If that's our agreement, then all you're doing, if you just go ahead and tear down the wall, all you're doing is putting me in a position where I have to take you to arbitration to have the contract enforced. And if the contract is legitimate, then the rights in the contract are legitimate, right?
But I'm saying the contract isn't legitimate, because I don't think we can... At some point, somebody built that wall, right? And then they tried trading it to both of us at once. That is illegitimate. That title transfer does not make any sense. Because the proof I use... I'm
sorry. I was unclear. I was unclear with that. I don't mean to say that I owned the warehouse initially, and I gave up. I brought you into the fold on the exclusive control of it as part of running it for the partnership, because in this example, you paid to get our initial run of widgets, and so I brought the building, you bring the widgets, and we go into business, right?
Okay. And so there, you can't have a contract which says that you transfer half of something to me, and in exchange I transfer half of something to you, unless we're literally like slicing it down the middle, right?
Sure.
Because we can't both own the same thing at the same time, because then we're going to have conflict, because then if there is a conflict over it, we can't resolve it. Now, it might be that we want to both own it, but the way you would have to deal with that is if you still own it the whole time, and if the business doesn't work, we can't agree on what to do with this wall, then you have to pay some penalty fee or something. And penalty fee is maybe confusing language. I assume you know about this because you're like a lawyer, but like you're not like doing a bad thing. You're not doing like a criminal thing. That
yes. Well, you can say. I mean, you could call it, if it was an amount specifically stated in the contract, it would be liquidated damages. If it was just an agreement on that the value would be exchanged, then it would be whatever the value of the asset is, whatever we agree the value of the asset is, and that would be determined probably in arbitration, right? So all of that works, right? But to me, that's all saying that the contract is legitimate. And that the right that I have given you the right to use the wall. I mean, if you want to hang a picture on the wall, hang a picture on the wall. I can't tell you no, right? Because it's not a material change.
The contract is legitimate if it is stated in explicit title transfer terms, not in terms of we both own this thing. As if we both contract theory doesn't lie antecedent to property theory. And, however we get to this situation of us both owning a wall, like my proof doesn't care how we got into the situation of everybody owning the stick. If we have it that we both own the wall, then and I want to tear the wall down, you don't want this to happen. Either it gets teared down or it doesn't get torn down, right? Those are our two options, and our property theory can say either that the wall should get torn down or that it shouldn't get torn down. And if it says that it shouldn't get torn down, well, then I don't have the right to control it, and vice versa. And both options are a contradiction with the assumption that we both have the right to control it.
If we have that contract, though, let me ask you this way, because I'm understanding why at base, this is what I see as contradictory. Okay, is this idea that if I own my property, what's mine is mine, right? That I can't contract with someone and say, okay, also yours.
Because a contract isn't just... Does that make sense? Yeah. So this is like why we have to be very autistic about what a contract means in the theory. Because a contract isn't just, oh, I'll promise to do this, Oh, let's
no, not at all.
Yeah. So what specifically would the and also yours contract be? Would it be Dino transfers title of the wall to Dino and Zulu?
I mean, if you wanted to, how you wanted to do that functionally, I can think of a few ways to say it, but whether that title actually transfers is kind of what we disagree on, right? Not whether or not we can say it did.
Whether it transfers is very particular about what the wording is. Like, you can't just arbitrarily word a contract and have it be a contract, right? If it is of the form, Dino transfers title of the wall to Dino and Zulu, or A and B, or whatever, that's an illegitimate contract in the same way that Dino transfers title of his own body to Zulu is an illegitimate contract. Like, the contract doesn't make any sense. It doesn't work. You can't have that contract. You can't sell your own body in slavery because you can't alienate your body in the first place.
Right. Well, to me, that's a clear distinction in those two examples, that you can't alienate your body, but I can absolutely alienate the building, the warehouse.
But you can't alienate it to two people at the same time, because that you can't jointly homestead something. You can't have two people simultaneously homestead the same thing. What that is in my theory, I don't know if other people have addressed this before, I haven't seen it, is that's a stalemate. It's not a homestead. It's not homesteaded until one person actually relinquishes it to the other person, or until somebody actually pushes the other guy off, in which case he has given up that right.
See, I have a disagreement with that as well. I think there's if you were to build something with another person, like you go out in an unknown place and you and another guy get together and build a thing, okay? I think it's probably true that you own, let's just call it a homestead. Let's say me and my wife go out in the middle of nowhere and we start a homestead, okay? We're sitting there and we're hoeing our garden, okay? I think it's fair to say that I own the rows that I hoe and she owns the rows that she hoes, okay? If our agreement, once we each have ownership of our hoed rows, if we say, look, this homestead is ours. I'm not going to do anything with those rows that you wouldn't want done. You're not going to do anything with those rows that I wouldn't want done. And if we disagree, we have to do thus and so.
Sure, but
we each bring each other in on our title.
Right, but that's worded as a promise. I promise not to do anything you wouldn't want done, and you promise not to do anything I wouldn't want done. We need for it to be a contract.
I disagree. I think it's an exchange of the actual. I think it's an exchange of a title interest.
So
I think it's an exchange of actual title.
The fundamental problem here is, though, that however you want to get to both of you owning the homestead, you still have this contradiction because you can't resolve conflicts between you. And maybe if we're not caring how we get to this situation, let's just say Crusoe and Friday own everything on the island together. Well, it becomes pretty clear at that point that they don't actually have any property rights at that point, right? if our property theory is saying Crusoe and Friday both own everything, the second they come into any disagreements, we can't appeal to this property mechanism and say, oh, well, Crusoe has the property right there, so therefore he should get it, right? He's allowed to win that conflict. Like, the whole reason we came up with property rights in the first place was because we wanted to know who should win in conflicts. But to whatever extent you have group property, you can no longer do this, right?
I don't think that's the case. I just don't think that's the case, because to me, it seems that if I were to say, if we were to form a contract, and let's assume the legitimacy of the contract, actual bargain for exchange with value exchanged, all this other stuff. This is an actual contract about title. If we were to make such a contract whereby each of us holds full title to the thing, the conflict that's resolved is any conflict with a non-title holder. That conflict is solved, as it would be if there were only an individual owner. The conflicts that arise then arise not under property theory, but under a theory of contract, because of our contract.
But all the theory of all the theory of contract is telling you is, how do you transfer title of property from one person to another person? It isn't telling you how you resolve conflicts. That is strictly in the realm of property theory.
No. I mean our contract. Our individual contract controls. We made the law when we agreed.
I don't think you can make laws. I mean, I think it's, definitely it's easy enough.
Contract, this is a core, okay. I think this is a core disagreement. A contract is privately made law binding the parties. To me, that is the core distinction that describes a contract and makes it different from any other rights or duties that you might have arising out of natural law. A contract is private law. It's law that you and another party assent to abide by. That's how I conceive of contract, and that's how contract is described generally in not just professional circles, but I think in libertarian theory too. I think requires that.
But all a contract is saying is A transfers title of X to B, right? That's in a nutshell. That's all it's doing. The only law in libertarian theory is the non-aggression principle. That's all there is. And then from that, you can get everything else, which is somewhat idiosyncratic. Most people have like, oh, well, we need the NEP and we need property rights. Nah, you can get property theory from the non-aggression principle fully well. And that's,
I agree with that. I agree with that.
That's all you need. So you don't have extra principles, because whatever extra principles you're claiming to come up with, they certainly couldn't contradict with the NEP, but that would just mean that it's a subset of the NEP. It's an implication of the NEP. It's, you don't own that anymore, so you're not allowed to do what you want with it.
Sure. Well, that's actually kind of my point, is that the NAP would not restrict me from agreeing to different laws, rules of engagement, whatever you want to call it, with another person with regard to my property. So and I disagree with this concept that all a contract tells you is that title is being transferred. That's not really true in my view. A contract not only tells you what title is being transferred, but also the behaviors and actions upon which that title transfer is contingent. That's the law. That's the rules that govern the relationship that the contract governs.
Well, I don't think that.
So I'm sorry?
I don't think that's making new laws or anything. That's just saying, on the condition that you give me that hot dog, I'll give you this $5. I don't think that's making a new law. That's just, we're simultaneously abandoning and taking up a new thing.
See, I disagree, because you can have in contract behaviors that are contingencies to the transfer of title. So, for example, if I say, I will buy that hot dog from you, but only if you don't buy cigarettes with the money. If you agree to that, then title transfers.
I don't think you can have a contract on just those terms. You would have to say, you'd have to be like, and because then they don't actually own that money, right? It would have to be some sort of weird aleatory arrangement where on the condition that you buy cigarettes in the future, you give me the money I spent on the hot dog, right? Assuming the money exists at that point.
Yes.
You can't have it just that I will buy this hot dog.
That would be assumed that if you don't, that it would be assumed that if you do go buy cigarettes, title reverts, and you've now just stolen my money and bought cigarettes with it, and you owe me. You know what I mean? Like, that would be assumed.
Well, you haven't stolen the money. This is a thing that Kinsella brings up, that if I fail to pay off a debt, I haven't stolen anything from you because, let's say I give you $100 today in exchange for $110 a year from now. If it comes to a year from now and you don't have that money, you're broke, right? Then what have you stolen from me? Well, you haven't stolen the $110 because the $110 doesn't exist, and you haven't stolen the $100 because I traded it to you. It can't be that it wasn't theft at the time of the contract and then it becomes theft later.
I agree with you. Stolen was a poor choice of words on my part, but now title has reverted to money that you gave away to somebody else. And I'm holding title to it because you went and bought cigarettes.
Only if there is an explicit term in there that says on the condition that I buy cigarettes, then I transfer title of money that I
if the title transfer is conditional, then definitionally, I think.
I don't think it's implied within the stated terms. I think that's more of a promise within the stated terms. Because you'd have to have I think you have to have explicit penalty clauses in there. They can't be just assumed.
Okay. I mean, that's fair, but I mean, I don't see why it's necessary. I think the logical response to a breach of condition is the reversion of title. So I just don't see. I don't see why it has to be explicit. It seems like it would just be assumed based on the formulation of the contract itself. But in either case, we can just assume it's explicit. I mean, it doesn't really matter to me anyway.
All right, yeah, that's fine. But the reason why it couldn't be just reversion of title is because I've then given that money to the shopkeep for the cigarettes, right? So I don't have that specific amount of money anymore, and you don't have the hot dog anymore, presumably, because you ate it. So we can't just have like a naive, and then those things get reversed, right?
Well, this is actually how I see that, and this is an interesting thing that's actually come up with a lot of the border conversation, is that under a strict sort of Rothbardian title theory, if you were to, and we can put this in the context of theft because it's title being in the wrong hands versus who actually has it, but it's not the same thing at base. If we can just forgive that fact and just roll with it. If you stole, for example, my bike, right, and then you went and you traded it to somebody, and now you don't have my bike, you have whatever you traded for the other guy. I still have title to my bike. I still have good title on my bike. I can either, if let's say, for example, I just said, okay, well, I'm fine with the thing you traded my bike for. Give me that. Okay, now I've legitimized that transfer of title between me and the third party, and you become a middleman that we cut out. Okay? Or I could tell you, I don't want that stupid thing you traded my bike for. I want the bike. Okay. This is where we run into a problem, by which it is more reasonable for me to assent to value in exchange, money or something like that, to replace the bike rather than the bike itself. It's just more reasonable. It doesn't mean I don't actually hold title to the bike that was stolen. I do. I can assent to something else. Does that make sense? Sure. Just because of those practical implications, it's just easier for me to assent to taking something else rather than tracking on the guy who has the bike and trying to get the bike. But fuck all that noise. It's going to cost a lot of money to do that. It's going to be a pain in the ass. And he's going to counter. Screw it. I just want something in exchange for the bike that you stole, and I can legitimize that. And now that's a legitimate exchange of title. You just bought the bike from me at that point. Right, but then we need to... Okay, so that's kind of what I'm saying in the sense that I still hold title to the money. Even if you take the money, that I paid you for the hot dog and you go buy cigarettes,
Well, hold on. That's different.
I'm holding title to that money because it would have reverted.
That's a different situation there, because you actually traded me that money. Either you can't trade money minus the ability to buy cigarettes. Either you traded me that money or you didn't. The difference with the case of the bike is that I actually stole that bike and you still own that bike out there. And we need to keep the autistic man in view who really just wants the bike, right? That is a possibility in there. Which is why you can't just have, well, it'd be easier to go along with group property. That isn't enough to cut it.
Well, no, I'm not saying it'd be easier to go along with group property. I'm just saying that the most reasonable person would probably just say, okay, well, I'll take some value in exchange. If a guy wants the bike, that can be handled. We can go to court and we can figure out the chains of title and we can get you your bike. But it's going to cost a lot of money and it's going to be a massive pain in the ass. I just think a lot of people wouldn't do it. You know what I mean?
Right.
But he absolutely has rights to it. I'm not saying he doesn't.
But our property theory still has to be able to handle that situation. And moreover, what I was saying is that is different because it was theft. It wasn't trade. If you are trading me, like I can't trade you a book minus the right to copy that book. This was Rothbard's mistake.
Sure. I was using that as an example of title being held by the wrong hands, right? What's happening? What I think is happening in the sense of the money for the hot dog. I say, don't spend the money on cigarettes, and I'll buy that hot dog. Okay. And otherwise, if you go buy cigarettes with the money, title reverts, and you owe me the money. Okay.
Oh,
I think you can absolutely make that exchange.
I don't think so unless it's explicit and you're saying, and if you buy cigarettes with this money, then you owe me $10 or something.
Sure. Well, you owe me money of the same value, whatever it is. Mm-hmm. So I don't see why you can't make that sort of exchange. Because I think, first of all, in contract, if I wanted to say title to the money reverts to me, I could say that. And we'd be in the same situation as with the bike. Not because it was stolen, but because title has reverted to me from you. And now I'm sitting here holding title to money you gave to somebody else. So I think that can be figured out. But by that same token, I think that the reason that has to be figured out is because you can exchange title for behavior. It just has to be explicit what that behavior is and what the title that's being exchanged is and what happens if it fails. Because to me, you can exchange title to money to, for example, a painter. You're not asking him for a thing. You're asking him to come act. Right? And so to me, that whole thing legitimizes the idea that you can contract for behavior. I am paying you to come to my house and act, apply paint to my walls. And if you fail to do so, I get my money back.
But you'd have to be very
Does that make sense?
You'd have to be very autistic and specific and if you don't show up and do the job, or if you do it to some low quality or whatever it is, right? Then you agree to transfer title. And Rothbard does this with the singer. You want a singer to come sing at your party. If he doesn't come and sing, then he owes you money.
Yeah. Well, there's an interesting case actually. And for anyone who's super autistic about this and really interested in sort of where this kind of thinking diverges, there's a case. It's most generally called the reading pipe case, and this is a case whereby somebody had paid another individual to come install pipe in a building that they were constructing, and the contract explicitly stated that what should be installed is reading pipe, reading company pipe from the reading company. That's the only thing I want. Reading company pipe. I have this weird love of the reading company and I want their pipe in my house. Okay. So the guy doesn't install reading pipe. He installs something else. He installs some other brand of pipe. And the court says, it's pipe, dude. We're calling the contract substantially completed, and you don't get fucking anything from this. It's just pipe. Stop it. The dissent in that case says the contract was explicit. Reading pipe. This is a breach.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would agree.
I agree with the dissent in that case.
Yeah, I would agree there because he's basically... I believe that... He's defrauded the guy there. He has, basically said, yep, I did the job, don't worry, the reading pipe is in there, and here, give me my money. So that money being handed over actually never changed title. So he still has title to that money. I would agree there.
Exactly. I agree. And so to me, then it seems that because I can transfer title for behavior, okay, I can do that. And the contract, let's assume the contract is explicit. Let's assume that the title transfer side of the contract is handled because it's legitimate and the contract is good. If I can exchange title to a thing for behavior, and if I truly do have full title to my own property, I do not see why I cannot contract with another individual that we will behave with regard to my property in a particular way, which amounts to each of us holding full title to the property, as against the rest of the world. With regard to the two of us, we have different behaviors we have to engage in the governance of that property.
Because all the behavior is doing there is saying we can switch out behavior easy enough with the sun rises tomorrow, or fucking Mercury goes into retrograde, or whatever else, right? All the behavior is doing is saying, if some event occurs, I agree to transfer title of this to you, right? That's all it's doing. And that doesn't, from that basis, you can't have actual group property to bring it back around. You could get pseudo group property in the same way that you could get pseudo IP by just saying, hey, if I reveal that you've been, sleeping with somebody other than your wife or whatever, then you agree to transfer to me $100,000 or something, right? That would be pseudo IP on that piece of information, but it wouldn't be actual IP. And that's my point. You could get like a really complex arrangement. The companies could do this quite easily. You get a really complex web of contracts such that it's just never going to be within your best interest to treat it as if there isn't group property there. And you could have all kinds of crazy arbitration mechanisms, which are all specified in these contracts. But what I'm saying is that doesn't lead you to, and therefore multiple people own this one thing.
My question would then become, why is it if I make such a contract, as I have with my wife, if I make such a contract and the agreement is that we have to have this unanimous we have to have unanimous assent to any material changes to the property, okay? The fact that the contract would be, and I think that our libertarian norms should be upheld, would be evidence of the fact that the exchange was legitimate. Otherwise, it would just be, well, the contract's not legitimate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would say the contract.
Now we have to start doing chain of title stuff.
Yeah, that's my claim, is that contract in the naive form isn't legitimate. And you have to have an actual single owner of any given thing.
See, I don't see why the rights and duties of ownership can't be reciprocal under contract that way.
What do you mean?
By that I mean, if we were to make a contract like that, okay, those rights and duties are reciprocal. It doesn't only arise when, for example, you wanted to do something. It also arises if I want to do something. If you want to tear down a wall, I want to take out a window, and we disagree on that. Well, those rights and duties are reciprocal. They go both directions. And so whatever the conflict mitigation scheme that we have in our agreement is, most often it's going to be either you can buy my assent, or you can give me more of the profits from the business out of your part that you own, or you can pay me personally, or you can do hell, we could just dissolve the thing. Or you could buy me out of my share entirely if we agree to do that. Whatever our conflict mitigation scheme is, under our general partnership, it seems to me that the fact that has to be complied with means that was legitimate title transfer. Because I don't see why that contract would be illegitimate given all the terms being there.
It would only have to be complied with if it is legitimate title transfer. And it's only legitimate title transfer if it is still specifying a single owner of a single thing. And you can have this sort of reciprocity in there where we both have like mutual contracts where if I try and, maybe you own it in the first case, and if you try and do something without mutual agreement, then title becomes mine. And then if I try and do something without mutual agreement, then title becomes yours, and it kind of flip-flops back and forth, and we're in like a sort of stalemate there. You could have a situation like that if you want, but it still has to be owned by one guy at any given time. It can't be owned by both of us.
Okay, so would you say that in the conception of this, I'm sorry, I have to tear a page off my notes because I've been doodling as I'm talking. It helps me talk. If I were, okay, so would you say then that the agreement that I'm describing doesn't actually describe mutual ownership of title, that it instead describes, for example, title which changes hands when it's time for a decision to be made. So, for example, let's say my wife goes to court on Monday, and she is, on behalf of our firm, going to take on some cases, okay? She's on the appointment list, and she's going to go to court, and she's going to take on some cases for our firm to work on. Okay. So when she is there at court taking on cases, if she has, and we've talked about this, we've laid out these terms on what kind of cases we should take on and what's unreasonable and what's reasonable and all this stuff, the kind of things I would agree to. So she knows going in what kind of cases I would agree to take and what I would think are bad deals. So is the assumption then that a contract which creates a mutually a co-exclusive ownership of title between multiple individuals, would you say that instead it should be said that title belongs to whoever's making decisions at the time?
So when
she goes to court and she takes on those cases, she is acting with title. And if I were to do the same thing, I would be acting with title, but we can't both have it at the same time.
Yeah, that would be one way of doing it. Or one person has it the whole time, or, any number of things. This is sort of like, Kinsella says, your failed business model is not my problem to like the IP people. It's a similar thing going on here.
Right.
Like, your failed property arrangement solution isn't my problem, right? Either there is some way, with like pages and pages of different reciprocal contracts with like all kinds of crazy stuff in there. You could make it like thousands of pages long if you wanted to. Either that is possible to achieve exactly what you want under strict title transfer terms, or that isn't possible. And if it isn't possible, you just got to suck it up.
Okay. So let's take it into this. Let's take it to the wall. All right. Let's take it to the wall. Let's take it to this wall that you want to tear down, and I want to stay up. We have this contract. We assume let's assume that we have done all the things that would make a contract legitimate, but for this core disagreement that we have about the fact that supposedly we both have title to the thing. Okay. But for that core disagreement, we've done everything else that makes a title legitimate, or that makes a contract legitimate under libertarian theory. Mm-hmm. You want to tear down the wall? I don't want the wall torn down. We go to arbitration. What result?
Well, if but for that, are you saying that is still in there, or it's not in there?
It's the thing that the thing that we disagree on. I think is this as part of this contract. We assume it's in there, but the other things that a contract needs under libertarianism, we say are there. But this term is there. We disagree on this term's legitimacy. I'm with you on that. But we go to arbitration with that contract, and what happens?
So if it's a rational judge, he would look at that and say, no, you don't both own it. Who owned it originally? Oh, it was Dino owned it originally. He owns it. Next case.
And the result is that I owe you nothing because I got my way.
Yeah.
With the thing that I told you were entitled to half of the interest in.
Yeah. Assuming there's no like penalty clauses or anything in there, if we just had the naive form of we both own this, then yeah, the rational judge would say, oh yeah, Dino still owns it. You know, stamp it off, next case.
See, in my view, the partnership agreement itself is not the naive form. All of those conflict mitigation things are part of an agreement like that. All of those conflict mitigation things where we have to, where, for example, you know, if you go tear down a wall, you owe me for my interest in the wall, or you have to buy my consent for you to have done that. Do you know what I mean? Like all of those things are in an agreement like that.
Sure, they might be in there.
Does that make sense?
It would be, you know, that's like sort of, there's this concept in programming called the happy path as against the unhappy path. So the happy path is when everything in your function is just working normally, it's all going great. But then there's also the unhappy path where, you know, maybe your function was expecting a string and it receives something which isn't a string. And whoops, that's going to fuck things up, right? So you have to do error handling. Now, what all this conflict resolution stuff is doing, that's all the happy path. That's assuming we're still going along with this. We're still saying, yep, we're in agreement. Okay, let's go to the flow chart of what we should do to deal with disagreements. But there's still the unhappy path to consider, which is, you know, we're coming to blows over this. I want to shoot you, you want to shoot me. And we got to figure out, okay, who's actually in the right here? Or at least the property theory does, right? And the property theory says, well, it never actually transferred away from Dino. Dino still owns it. So Dino is in the right, Liquid Zulu is a fucking murderer or terrorist or whatever, right?
I don't see. I disagree with that. I think the contract controls. I think I have no right to come to blows with you over it, just as you have no right to come to blows with me over it, because we've already determined it's already been written down. So to me, the contract controls that.
Like we can,
that's that. It doesn't. There's there
you can,
because these are terms that we assented to. And we can't go back on them without having some sort of penalties involved. Penalties that would probably be the exact same penalties that are described in the case of conflict.
So, sorry, what I think is going on here is my view of such a contract where it's got this happy path, where it's got all this huge flow chart on, you know, like our couples counselor or whatever said, okay, here's a big flow chart you can use to deal with your disagreements. It's sort of a package deal of a contract. It includes both the promise that we'll follow this huge, you know, set of terms for how we'll deal with disagreements, and it includes actual title transfers. And we need to sort of separate these things. It's fine enough to have like a bunch of promises written down on paper, and then on that same page of paper have an actual contract written down. That's fine, but we need to treat them differently. You can't transfer something along with an apparatus to deal with disputes over that thing. That apparatus is just in your mind, right? It's just how am I promising to deal with this thing?
See, I see them as conditional to the property interest being legitimate on either side. Those are conditions. They're not just promises. They're conditional to the title interest legitimacy. If, for example, we go to arbitration and you say, fuck arbitration, I'm tearing down the wall. Okay, well, now you have failed to meet the conditions of our contract. And now title really is mine because you are in breach.
I mean,
does that make sense?
Breach is another word which I like, you know. I don't think I'm breaching or breaking or violating any contracts ever.
I mean, in a general sense, the conditions that our agreement for title holding was the conditions that it was conditioned upon have not been met. Your duty to meet whatever conditions are there, you have failed to meet that duty, and now we have to decide what we do about that. And probably title goes to me.
I mean, it seems like this type of contract could be done without this clause of we both own it, right? Just have you own it the whole time, and have all these same conditions, where if you're, being pernickety, or you're causing problems, or whatever it is, then title goes over to the other guy, in this case me, right? I don't see why we need this. First, I don't see why we need this concept of us both owning it. And second, I still think that's a contradiction, because either I get to tear down the wall or I don't. If I don't, then I don't own it.
I think we need this concept of co-exclusive ownership, because it is exactly what ownership is. Our mutual control of a piece of property is exclusive as to the rest of the world, and it is governed by a set of laws, dictates, rules, whatever, that we have both agreed to, that are conditional to our both holding that exclusive right. If those conditions are not met, the exclusivity reverts to a single person, whoever wasn't wronged, or whoever didn't do wrong in that case, right? So to me, we need this concept because it describes exactly what ownership is. It is ownership. It's conditional title holdership on the basis of terms agreed upon in contract. Does that make sense?
It's not the exact same as normal ownership, definitely not. Because I'm not allowed to control it. I'm not allowed to do what I want with it, which is always the case for, if I own, this beer that I've got in my hand, right? I own this, I bought it or whatever. Then, I don't know why I said whatever. Am I implying that I stole it? No, I bought this beer, right? So I'm allowed to drink it or pour it out or do whatever I want, right? Anything with this, I'm allowed to do. And I'm allowed to prevent other people from doing what they want with it more precisely, right? Otherwise,
if you wanted to take it and throw it up on top of a glacier, you'd be free to do that.
Yeah, 1,000 of them, whatever I want to do, right? But
yes, exactly. I agree.
This is sort of like a fiction. This idea of we both own it. An economist might be fine enough looking at us as both owning it. Okay. But the jurist has to be very precise about having his property theory assign an exclusive, single, one guy owning any given piece of property. The second you have multiple people owning anything, you have multiple titles to the same property, that's a problem. It doesn't work. You can't have more property titles than there is actual property in existence.
See, I don't see it as creating more titles. I see it as title. This is kind of the way that I see it. There is a sort of almost a law of conservation to title in property, in the way that I see it, which is that once title has arisen through homesteading, that title exists forever. And if the land is abandoned, then title's abandoned with it, and someone else can come along and pick it up, but title is conserved. Okay, that's kind of the way that I think of it. It may not be 100% accurate on some edge cases, but it's the way that I sort of perceive it.
Sure.
If I am the holder of title, if I'm the signatory of title, why can I not? I don't see why, under a specific set of terms laid out for dealing with conflict and all these other things, I don't see why I can't walk up to you and hold the title with you, and you grab one end of it and I'm grabbing the other, and we're both moving it around in concert, and the rest of the world doesn't get to touch it, but it's you and me, and we're moving this title around in concert. And as soon as you want to walk one direction and I have to walk the other, then we have these terms that we can look to, this law that we've made that you and I can look to and say, okay, this is how we deal with that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and the problem there is you're just addressing the happy path of we're both following along with everything, and you're not addressing the unhappy path of, what if I wake up tomorrow and I'm a psychopath and I just really hate you and want to destroy everything about you, right? We can have conflicts because it's scarce still, right? And
yes, I agree with you. I agree with you, but at the same time, let's say I owned the warehouse first, and I'm being totally ridiculous, unreasonable about you wanting to tear down that wall. The wall needs to come down. I just have this weird emotional attachment to the wall. I start beating your ass. I'm saying, we're not going to the fucking arbitrator over this. That wall's fucking staying. Under the terms of our contract, okay, now you have full title, even though I'm the one that brought it to the partnership. You would have full title under the terms of our contract, and I would have no right to say otherwise.
sure, if the terms of the contract were on the condition that Dino is being unreasonable, however you want to define that, then title is transferred to Zulu.
Sure, there would be some terms. There would be some term along the lines of failure to comply with arbitration in the resolution of conflicts shall result in title reversion to the whole of the asset to the partner who is cooperating with arbitration. Whatever you want to word it. It's I have to sit down for a minute. But
I don't think that's
like
I don't think that's
exist.
reversion there. I think that's just a regular plain old transfer, because I don't think that we at any point in that situation, I don't think we both owned it. It could be you own it and then you transfer it to me if you're being unreasonable. That's fine. What isn't fine is we both own it. That it doesn't make any sense, because we can imagine maybe we're real lug nuts, we're real grugs, or maybe we're just not omniscient, right? We didn't foresee any conflicts ever happening, and we didn't build in any of these terms for how we deal with conflicts, or we're just not omniscient, and we didn't deal with every possible conflict that could ever happen. You know, there's some loophole or edge case that we didn't think about. We would still have to be able to deal with that. So we have to, and our legal theory has to be able to deal with the naive people, right? The people who didn't deal with every edge case. Or maybe any edge case at all. Maybe they didn't bother. Maybe the contract just says we both own it, right? That is the easier case to see why group ownership doesn't make any sense. You can sprinkle a whole bunch of layers of sort of flow charts and everything above it, but that doesn't deal with the case of two grogs coming together. Because if group property is really actually just legitimate, it should also apply to the case of two grogs coming together. And all the contract says is Grug A and Grug B agree that Grug A and Grug B both own the thing.
Okay. So would you then say this? Because what I'm trying to do is, I think you have a point, but I don't think it's fully formed. Like, it's because there are these cases, these contract agreements, which I do think are legitimate, and I do think create co-ownership. But maybe what I'm describing is something that's just functionally indistinguishable from co-ownership. So let's say, maybe does this place title in stalemate between the two holders? And each has claim to title, and title sits in stalemate until such a conflict arises.
So and
a decision has to be made.
The theory of stalemate, currently to my knowledge, has 2 paragraphs written on it, and I wrote both of them. So it's not very highly developed, but it's what is there is very, very limited. It's basically, we both grab a stick at the same time, and we're like, oh fuck, I couldn't rip it off, because then I'd be pulling it away from you. You couldn't rip it off, because then you'd be pulling it away from me. We basically just have to stand there. Now, maybe you could have it that we're like, okay, let's just bring this over to the campsite and discuss it there, and we're both like carefully walking along with it and making sure we're not pushing the other guy off. I'd say that's I'll for the purpose of the discussion, I'll say, okay, that's probably fine. There might be some issue which comes up with that. We could deal with that at a later point. And on the first principles derivation of contract that I give, it is one person abandons at the same time that another person homesteads. Maybe you could extend that to another person begins to homestead, and then you could indeed transfer into a stalemate. But that would not be the specific group property argument that I'm attacking. That would be a very different thing. And on prima facie, it seems fine if you want to trade it into stalemate.
Okay. Because I think what we're having is a disagreement as much on terminology as otherwise. Because I do agree with you that once conflict arises, you have to figure it out. There's something that has to be done, and if the terms of the contract do not control, you opened a business with someone who's a real fucking hard-headed moron, and he doesn't want to abide by the rules that he agreed to for dealing with conflict. Well, then, yeah, you have to figure out what happens to title in full. You have to figure out what actually happens to title. And so I think that can also be controlled by the contract, but whatever. It seems to me that the best sort of corollary in the way that you're seeing things versus the way that I'm seeing things is that they're functionally indistinguishable, co-ownership and trading into stalemate for a purpose, a conditioned stalemate for a purpose.
Yeah, and
does that make sense?
It's very similar to voluntary slavery. You can't have actual voluntary slavery. That makes no sense. But you could functionally achieve a very similar situation with like crazy contracts involved. You can approximate a lot of different things that, apparently some people want. You can approximate them with contracts. Like the title transfer theory, at first it seems very limited. But, another computer science analogy, functional programming where all you have is functions, at first seems very limited, but you can actually do quite a lot with that.
I would be 100% willing to drop the co-ownership language in favor of traded into stalemate.
Sure.
I think that's probably because what we're describing is functionally the same thing. I don't think there's any real world difference, and I also do agree with you that title. See, the way that I think about it is like title has to arise to a single owner. There has to be a single identifiable owner in which title arises. There's one homesteader of a piece of property, okay? And after that, it's fair game. Like that person can do whatever they want with that title. Mm. And so if our disagreement is based on this idea that you can't trade title into co-ownership, well, it's almost like this. It's almost like my wife and I have agreed that title to all the assets of our firm are to be held in trust. And we are using the fact that we are the trustees of this thing. Both of us are the trustees of this thing through our business operations. But should some kind of conflict arise, break glass in case of emergency, now we have to figure out who it was being held in trust for.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's perfectly fine. Like, I mean, trust is also, and guardianship and these things, they're also legitimate. So you can quite precisely approximate what a group ownership would look like in the idealized version of group ownership. Basically, all I'm attacking with my group property as a contradiction stance. The way I came to it was an intelligent Georgist was like, who agreed with the non-aggression principle and everything. He was like, yes, but everybody owns everything which hasn't been homesteaded yet. So homesteading is an aggression. And I was like,
yeah, no, that's insane.
Yeah, I was like, okay, well, what would that mean for everybody to own everything? Let's just take the general case of a group owning something. Well, you can't deal with conflicts then, so it doesn't make any sense. That is the sort of thesis that I'm attacking. And with the Dave Smithians, the taxpayers owning the fucking public libraries and shit, well, no, that doesn't make any sense. But yeah, if you want to have like some crazy apparatus, you can approximate what it is they're trying to get across.
I don't think the on the Dave Smith thing, I think the idea that the taxpayers own it fails for other reasons, not just because of the group ownership issue. But even so, especially if what I'm saying especially if what I'm saying is true, and that that parties can contract to hold title in trust, and then break glass in case of emergency in this situation. In the failure mode that you were describing earlier, the unhappy path, you have to figure out who title belongs to. And that could be related to the contract. That could be related to who brought the property to the partnership in the first place. There's a number of ways that you could try to do that. But it seems to me that that's not really, if such a thing as that is possible, then all the Dave Smithian would have to say is, well, yeah, the government's holding it in trust for the taxpayer.
Which would be ludicrous because, to get to this point, we have to have an hour 20 discussion.
But I think it fails for other reasons. You know what I mean? I think it fails for other reasons, not because the concept of that itself is illegitimate. I think it fails for other reasons.
But
not the least of which is there's no agreement to do so.
So, I don't think a single Dave Smithian has even an understanding of trust or anything. But fundamentally, to get to that approximation, you have to have a crazy set of contracts, which would be too difficult for us to list in a live discussion. It would have to be. I think it's far
more simple than that, though. I'm agreeing with your idea that these things have to be accounted for, but a lot of times these things are accounted for based on the definitions of the words you're using. So, if we are agreeing to form a partnership, a lot of the conflict mitigation stuff is assumed in the fact that we're forming a partnership. It's definitional to the term.
Sure. So I
think it's actually a lot more simple than that. Anyway,
it won't be as complex as some of the contracts we deal with these days with positive law, but it would be complex by comparison to what a lot of natural law contracts are looking like. But it still needs explicit contracts. You can't have the state holding it in trust.
I say that in part because I wrote my partnership contract with my wife in about 5 minutes sitting at the bank because they wanted to see one for us to open accounts for the business. And I was like, why do you need one? Actually, and this is another issue. The contract to form a partnership is formed by operation of law just by agreeing to do it. You don't have to actually have a writing. But and I told them, I was like, you don't actually, and that's a legal thing. Libertarianism may disagree. I don't see why libertarianism would disagree, but it might. And so I sat there and I wrote our partnership agreement. I said it'll be governed as thus and so, and definitional to those things are, it'll be governed as a general partnership, yada yada. Well, definitional to the way a general partnership is governed, you have all of these things that are already assumed with regard to conflict mitigation and stuff like that. So it's simpler than you think if the terms are loaded enough. Basically, is what I'm saying.
One sort of niggling point there would be that all the paper is doing is evidencing it, right? It's not, the paper isn't the actual contract itself. So you'd have to be, and I mean, I do think social norms are valid. So if these terms are understood to be certain things, that it's fine. But you'd have to be careful with it, and it would have to be still explicit, and it would have to be one guy actually owns it the whole time. Yeah, it seems like there isn't much of a disagreement here.
Yeah, I think what we have a disagreement on is not how it functionally appears in the world when an agreement like this is made, but just how we describe it. So I think, and I would be, and like I said, if the functional thing is, if the functionality of it is the exact same as trading title into stalemate with another person, right, or into trust rather, where it's being held in limbo, right, as between these two people. And it's known that it's between those two people. It's co-exclusive. The rest of the world is not involved. But if the idea is that we're trading title into limbo or stalemate, I like limbo better because stalemate implies conflict, and usually a partnership's formed for a purpose. But
to be clear, when I use the term stalemate, limbo, I use that term specifically because it's not a conflict yet. The limbo is fine.
Yes. Okay. Totally fair. Totally fair. Yeah. In either case, it seems to me that what we're describing is the exact same thing. That we're both going to operate as if each of us is holding this title that's in stalemate right now until such a time as we can't.
Mhm.
And if we can't, the contract is going to control. And if one of us says fuck the contract, then we're gonna decide who actually holds title to this. And it's probably gonna be the person who didn't say fuck the contract.
Yeah, that's definitely.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, that lines up quite well with my understanding of stalemate, where if A shoves B off, then B gets title.
Yes.
Yeah, that's all
okay.
fine.
I'm okay with this. I'm okay with it operating on a theory of stalemate. And if you wanted to sort of write more about stalemate and get I don't know why you would want my thoughts on it, but if you did, I'd be happy to give them to you if you wanted to do more to build out this theory of stalemate, because I think it's very good. And I think it functionally describes exactly what I'm saying is co-ownership. I don't see there being any real conflict as to edge cases of like what happens if I can't even think of an edge case that they would be different. Really. There might be one, but I'm not coming up with it.
I'll send you through the 2 paragraphs currently which are written on this in the whole world, if you want to look at that. Yeah, it's
okay.
So it's good. I suppose we've come to somewhat of an agreement here. Yeah, I normally do
yes,
a post.
I think so.
I normally do like a post-debate discussion in my Discord. Do you want to join in on that at all?
Sure.
All right, I'll send
sure.
you.
I'd be down for that.
I'll need
a link to your Discord. I don't think I'm in it.
Yeah, I'll send you a link, and I'll also send one into the chat. I know some people are asking about that. Link expires in 7 days. All right, that should be fine. This here. Alrighty, and go on in the chat. All right, and then I'll be right back, and I'll see you in there.
All right.
See you in a sec.
Thanks very much, man.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, Dino's a pretty good guy. I've known him on Twitter for a while. Here be this bitch. Ugh, come on. Well, that should be alright. Alrighty.
Yo,
Hello.
this is
Yo.
debate.
Yeah, this is post-debate. I mean, we're still live, but...
I didn't watch the debate, to be honest.
What'd you say?
I didn't watch the debate.
Ah.
How many more of these group property debates do you have?
I mean, it's probably going to be my last. I'll stop accepting them because it's like 4 in a row or something.
Weren't you gonna do one with Lego though at the end of the month?
Oh, fucking, is that on fucking group property as well?
Yeah,
Oh, Jesus.
that's like his main disagreement.
Oh my god, that'll be fun.
But he probably has like different arguments. He's not a libertarian. Eduardo.
So what happened was he basically came to an agreement on not that group property is valid, but that contracts can be complex so as to approximate some kind of not group property, but something such that it would never be in one person's. No one would value not breaching the contract.
Mm-hmm.
I like the description that title is actually being held in trust or stalemate or in limbo as between the two parties until conflict arises. Because the truth is that property theory only exists to resolve conflicts. If you don't have conflicts, you have no need for the theory. And so the idea that you can resolve conflict by having a set of conditions upon which title is held in superposition, basically, until such a time as you need to determine something about it, I think is a fair concept. I don't think it creates any functional difference between what I'm describing with group property and what's being described with the idea of a contract in stalemate. Or a title in stalemate, I'm sorry.
Yeah, and then...
I think that's a good description of it.
Yeah, and this is a much more sophisticated way of dealing with it than... well, the law of excluded middle clearly doesn't hold anymore. We can just do whatever we want. Which is what the Smithians resort to.
Is that saying that like contracts come before the property rights, or
no? It's
you have to have rights in property to contract for its use.
Yeah,
it's basically one way of trading something is person A abandons it at the same time that person B homesteads it. That's how you'd have a trade between A and B. This is an expansion beyond that into, well, what if A abandons it at the same time that B and C try and pick it up at the same time? And that is described as a stalemate. So it's a trade into a stalemate situation, which that's fine.
was this?
I do. I'm sorry. I do see a question in the chat that says, wouldn't using a third party a trust require at least 2 contracts? You don't have to have a third party to hold something in the concept of a trust. A legally extant trust you do, but the concept of a trust is just nobody touches it until it's time to. So you don't really have to have the third party to do it, and that's why limbo or stalemate's probably a better term for it, is because a trust would be a third party. A legally extant trust would have to be a third party. I'm sorry, I just saw that question and I thought that should be cleared up because using the word trust is a little confusing there.
Yeah, I didn't watch the debate, so I don't know if it was like if this had something to do with the open closed borders thing that's been going on.
No, Zulu and I both think that's dumb.
Okay.
And for mostly the same reasons, as far as I understand it. Would you say that's fair, Zulu?
Yeah, there is no chain of title transfer is probably the big one. The state doesn't own it, right? So they can't. The taxpayers, the state didn't buy it, right? The sort of where the disagreement came in is I'm saying there's also a different reason why the taxpayers can't own it, and that's because they can't own anything as a group. That's where sort of the disagreement came in, but it's basically resolved here. Yeah, the main point just that the state doesn't own that stuff, so it can't exclude people from it. Yeah, we agree on that.
Yeah, this was more a disagreement on conceptually what does it mean if more than one person has control of a piece of property. Like what does that look like? Because I know it's possible because I'm doing it. And so what I was trying to do in this conversation was drill down on what's the disagreement here that makes as I understood it before we actually started drilling down on it, what is the disagreement that makes what I'm functionally doing right now impossible? And it turns out that it's probably not. We're just probably using different words to describe the same condition. And we conceptualize of the title in different situations given that. It kind of seems like that's what's fell out of this.
Oh yeah. Did y'all hear that the Dragon Ball Z creator died?
Yeah, I saw that.
I'm sad about it.
The cartels will be teary-eyed tonight. I saw one tweet which was saying somebody's going to have to be tortured by a teary-eyed Mexican like drug dealer tonight. What's his name, like Akira or something?
Do what?
His name's like Akira or something, isn't it?
Akira Toriyama.
That's the one.
There were people who were angry because of his designs, like Majin Buu in particular. But or no, Popo, not Majin Buu, Mr. Popo.
That's the black one
actually,
with the
Boo
big
maybe
lips,
a little bit too. Yes, that's Popo. There are people who are very angry about that, and they really didn't want people to be sad about Akira's death because of the design of Mr. Popo, and they are getting absolutely raked over the coals. Nobody gives a shit.
Also, the Mises Arizona has seceded from the Mises caucus.
Finally.
Yeah. And somebody took up their
Mises
old
AZ
hat. I wonder who that
has
was.
been awesome forever.
Mises AZ still is awesome under new management.
Oh yeah. Well, not new management, new name, new branding.
Oh, I'm speaking about the Twitter
Yeah.
account. It's under new management now. And I happen to think the guy...
Oh, yes! Actual...
I happen to think the guy who runs this is very handsome. I wonder who he could be.
Who runs it now?
I'll never tell.
Yeah, somebody sniped the at pretty quick.
Yeah, I wonder how they knew.
Dang, what's so funny?
Oh man, just this. If you haven't looked at the Mises AZ account, it's very funny.
The Mises.
Did it get hacked or something?
No, they left the
No,
app because they left the Mises caucus.
Yes.
Oh, is there like a
Somebody
huge fighter or
took the act.
something on Twitter? Oh wow.
What was the Arizona Mises is now the Copper State Austrians, right?
Yeah.
And then
What?
and
Is that their Twitter?
yeah,
Copper State
Yeah.
He's
Austrians?
consistent mofo, you know.
It's like at Austrians AZ. I don't know why I'm saying Z, like I'm
Okay.
American now.
you didn't say Zed.
Yeah.
Yeah, but then that left the Mises AZ handle open because they changed the actual handle of what was the Mises AZ account. That left the Mises AZ handle open, and somebody sniped it.
Man, I can't even find their Twitter.
I put it in the
Somebody link it in the chat.
VC text. Austrian AZ.
But who's this guy that took the handle though?
I wonder who it could be.
Wait, is it you, bro?
I'll never
I've seen
tell.
this meme before.
Yo, Zulu, do you have a timeline, bro, of when you're gonna release this 2 hour plus AI art video?
Someday. I'm chipping away at it. Piece by piece.
Can you tell us how far you are into it, maybe?
Sure. Let's we can bring the fucking timeline up on the stream. We've got to open in a different thing. I am currently 1 hour and 48 minutes into it. He's a big boy.
I mean, I don't know how you have like so much to say on AI art.
I don't know how I got here either. I was thinking, oh, just a quick video on AI art, 15 minutes in and out. No, there's apparently a lot to say about it.
Did you cover like all of objectivist aesthetics or something?
And that's not the biggest part of the video.
Oh wow. Wow. Well, I'm hyped for it though.
It'll be a very good one. It's the highest quality video I've done, and by far the longest. I'm expecting big things.
How long is it?
Sorry?
How long is the video?
Oh, it's gonna be probably 2.5 hours long or something.
Damn.
Pulled an MRH.
So that's a movie, bro.
It's fucking long as shit.
MRH hasn't released a video in forever.
Yeah, like 11 months. He said it
Oh,
was
Zulu-
going to do so. Like
Zulu hasn't released a video
last
in
video.
months.
That's
What'd you
happens-
say?
That's what happens when you do these fucking 2-hour long videos.
Like MRH said, he's gonna make a video like some weeks after he made the Bitcoin video or crypto video in the end of the video. But yeah.
Well, it's been a long time since then, bro.
Yeah.
The people are starving.
Maybe you
They
should
need-
debate MRH.
I mean, what did I debate him about?
Have you ever talked with MRH on empiricism?
Yeah.
Yeah, I suppose so. I mean, does he do debates?
I don't know. Maybe.
I've seen him in your comments of live debates.
Yeah, he watches your debates.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know that. I speak to him on a semi-regular basis, but like, I don't know if he debates.
I'm just asking.
Is he like a full-on rationalist?
I don't know. I mean, last I talked to him about it, he was just looking into Kant or whatever.
Oh.
Wait, Zulu, are you a rationalist?
No, I'm an objectivist.
No.
Ah, what's the difference?
So, rationalism in terms of modern philosophy is basically Kantian. It is where you are gaining knowledge through just reason, pure reason, as detached from the senses, where objectivism is an empiricist philosophy, which is saying that the only source of knowledge is from the senses.
Ah, right, okay, thanks.
Yeah, it's really wild how they like took that name from the start, rationalist, when they just like retreat into like the supernatural, you know?
Yeah.
That's interesting. I like reading David Friedman's blog or whatever, and like the rationalist sphere. And it seems like much of what they do or what they actually practice is closer to the objectivist epistemology, like employing science and statistics to like maximally derive or to best derive truth, as opposed to the Kantian idea of what was it called, the phenomenal, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the basically the Kantian philosophy is completely anti-reason, because it says that you can't know anything about reality, because real reality is the noumenal world, which you can't say anything about, and you're dreaming up all these concepts,
Right, exactly.
like causality, the law of identity, and all this different shit. You're dreaming it up in your own fake little reality.
How did this get so accepted? It sounds so insane when you say it that way.
Basically, it's because Kant was able to answer Hume, and nobody else was able to answer Hume. Like, there is an analogy to be drawn with the business cycle, where you have the boom, which is like some constructive period, and then you have a bust of skepticism. And Hume was like the arch skeptic. And
Oh, yeah.
somebody
What's
needed to answer.
causing this cycle though? Is it a natural cycle?
So basically, it's easier to be like sort of when you're backed up against a wall to just say, oh, I don't know. You know, over time, as you have some constructive philosophy, people are going to start poking holes in that. And the skeptics are going to rise out of just poking holes, just being like, oh, well, that doesn't make sense. Well, what is your system? I don't know, man, I don't know, you know. Because that's just an easy tendency to fall into. So until you have like a perfect integrated philosophy out of everything, you're going to have these cycles, basically. Which, you know, I would say objectivism is, and the politics.
You have to like foresee like all the skeptics in like the future from now attacking your shit, Zulu.
Yeah.
Actually, I think I have a little something to add. I'm not quite sure if this is just like weird amalgamation, weird amalgamated regurgitation of like the stuff Rothbard's written about, but like most of philosophy isn't profitable by itself, and a lot of it comes from like the state and whatnot. And part of this leads, and this is the same thing with psychology. Like psychology as a field is wrought with so much terrible science, and yet it is central to like marketing. Like every massive conglomerate has teams of psychologists working day in, day out to create better like algorithms and create better models and add better advertisements. So there's money there, yet so much of the field is wrought with nonsense. And that's because the state is subsidizing enough of it to create these areas of nonsense, right? And philosophy just doesn't seem that profitable at all in the private sector. So then a lot of it is just like thinking hard and then publishing stuff for the sake of publishing stuff. But then actual productive philosophies, I think like objectivism, and I would say rationalism, but rationalism in practice rather than rationalism in name, more like productive sects of philosophy, they tend to get competition with the state-funded areas of philosophy that are just like trying to think for the sake of thinking, right?
Did you see the Ayn Rand Institute? They got like $1 million in subsidies.
That's ironic. That's ironic.
Yeah.
Well, it makes sense though. Like you think, like the part of it, and you touched on part of it, but part of it's the perverse incentive to publish. The idea that like you get all of this clout from publishing in academia, and when you like, that's where all of your credibility comes from, whether or not you publish and what you publish. And so people are willing to accept all kinds of bullshit in academia because it's a novel thing that can go in a journal, and everybody gets clout off of it. The journal gets its articles. The people who are publishing get to be published, and now they're published, and that's where all their clout comes from. And that whole thing creates this perverse cycle where being right isn't as important as being published.
Yep. This is actually a really funny thing one of my friends showed me, but many universities offer to pay for basically quote unquote business trips where you physically go to a forum somewhere internationally to discuss, to defend a published paper you have. And this paper can be on pretty much anything. And across the board, there's people who want to talk about science, right? So all these other people are receiving money from their universities to go meet up somewhere. And it's just like siphoning university money to send people around, to whisk them around and talk about cool stuff. Like, we got Discord, you don't need to go there, but they'll pay for the plane ticket to go to, like, I don't know, the Caribbean for a week. Yeah, man, to talk about this paper. Like, I want to get on that shit, god damn it.
Go hang out at the drinking club and pretend to argue.
Sorry?
I was just saying, go hang out at the drinking club and pretend to argue, when really you're just there for the drink.
And get fucking grants for it.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I've seen a few papers published on Oregon.gov. I'm trying to, like... I'm trying to learn about some, like, niche topic or whatever. I go to studies that are published on Oregon.gov, like my state's government website. This is like the peak of publishing for the local community, right? And their just entire methodology, all their results, their entire methodology is just like handwritten, sort of like a recipe book on like allrecipes.com or something. All their results, they say, this doesn't line up with any other study, but anyway, we trust it. And they go on to their conclusion. The conclusion makes no sense whatsoever. It's complete and utter bullshit, man. Somebody like, that's totally a courier play. They're totally getting a vacation in like fucking Hawaii for that shit.
Why would the state support the Ayn Rand Institute in this way? Like you said,
I wonder.
Perverse incentive. I didn't totally understand that. What do you mean by that?
It probably has less to do with the state actually being interested in it and more to do with how they're organized as an entity. Like how they're organized as a taxable entity is going to mean that they can apply for certain grants and subsidies and all kinds of stuff that like a regular corporation wouldn't be allowed to apply to. They're a think tank. Yeah. So a think tank is going to have certain access to stuff like that I don't think the government even actually reads those applications for grants and subsidies and stuff. I think they just sign them on them and go.
Yeah, I suspect like the thought process, the state is like is mostly going to like help the state and such. So like that's why the support.
I think it was for COVID actually.
Mm. And if they like,
that makes sense if they have employees. Yeah.
And if they like deny giving maybe Ayn Rand Institute, maybe I imagine there would be some kind of backlash. Maybe I don't know.
Yeah, but the ARI is it's holding back objectivism because there's zombie objectivism.
I think what happened is
okay. I don't know much about it.
Well, what could happen is that the state is trying to create a controlled opposition, and they've identified objectivism as this kind of rogue element. So trying to identify the weakest element of objectivism.
I don't think the state
as
is as competent as you're painting them as. The state is not able to identify.
That's my position as well.
Like, I would agree.
Yeah,
objectivism is
sure.
the biggest threat to the state which has ever existed. I would agree there. But the state has absolutely no means to uncover this, because the second they actually understood the philosophy, if they understood it well enough to identify that, then they'd be objectivists and they wouldn't be statists anymore. It's like it's just
sure.
outside of their abilities.
Yeah.
I mean, it's crazy that like these Peikoff lectures, right? They're like $250 for the whole thing.
Mhm.
And I just got it for free, like the rest of his history, philosophy lectures.
Oh, nice. How'd you get that? I suppose you probably can't say.
No, I just did a Google search, bro. I was like, free Peikoff history of philosophy lectures, modern philosophy, and you get Kant to modern day.
There you go.
Have you watched that? Have you seen that,
I have
Zulu?
not. I've only seen what is on YouTube.
I posted it in vids, the rest of it.
Oh, yeah, I see.
I haven't got that far though. I haven't even finished the ones on YouTube yet.
And obviously, we're all just joking here. We wouldn't violate the property rights of the Ayn Rand Institute. We would never do such a thing. It was a joke. He was saying a joke. I looked in the chat and it was a meme. And it was a big practical joke against me.
Wait, it's on stream?
Yes, it's on stream.
In Minecraft.
Is this is on stream? Oh, I didn't know. Yes, that was a joke.
But I can't show the meme on screen because, of course, it's got, a bunch of unsavory things on there. He was baiting me into looking at the meme, basically. But luckily I didn't look at it on the stream monitor.
I'm not too sure, honestly, on Rand's view of politics, right? Like, what do you have, like, what's your, like, major issue with the...
So basically, I think she is answering the wrong question. The question she should be answering is, okay, there's this thing called conflicts. How should we deal with conflicts? That is the question which law answers. She's rather addressing, okay, how should we orient society such that it best suits man, or whatever. Then that's taking a primacy of society as against primacy of the individual, which doesn't make any sense.
And when I talk with Randians about this, they usually give like practicality arguments, like pragmatic arguments, like, oh, anarchism won't work or this and that, right? It's like I think it's like they're not really like, I don't know what Rand's view on economics is, right? But she's not an Austrian.
Yeah, I mean, she thought like Mises was the best economist.
Then I don't know, like, why they're saying things like private security companies, a bunch of these won't work out, right?
Because they don't understand.
Result in warlords or something.
I mean, this is what I did in my challenge to minarchist video. I was basically like, okay, right, so you want to guarantee the preservation of rights. To what extent? How much should be spent? Should it be a tank for each person? Should it be a cop on each block? Should it be just a handgun for every fifth man? Like, how much should it be funded And it's unanswerable because it's the economic calculation problem. You need to have competition in the enforcement of rights for you to have any actual calculation with respect to that.
Is the Randian like minarchist state? Is it actually voluntary, or like when I talk to them, I don't think they really understand what contract theory is.
Yeah, I don't think it's been worked out in explicit terms by anybody ever.
So they just say like, oh, it'll figure itself out. Like it'll be voluntary because everybody agrees somehow.
I think they just haven't even addressed it properly.
A lot of people who I've seen describe voluntarist minarchism, which is itself kind of a contradiction in terms, but the people who I've seen describe their vision of it is that you have this monopoly force, basically, which is there to make sure that rights are enforced, and it is paid by like donation. Like everyone pretty much agrees that it's a good idea, so enough people donate to keep it afloat. But at that point, like you're just on the cusp of a market for that. Like just have the market instead.
Yeah, just have, I want to pay for these specific services. I don't want to be just donating for whatever you feel is you want to give to me. Nah, I want specifically you to post an armed guard on my door 24/7, and I'll pay you through the nose for this.
And that also gives you rights under the contract with whoever it is you're hiring. Because if you have a monopoly organization that you're donating to, then you get things like the necessity, and it is an absolute necessity, of things like Warren v. District of Columbia, where they don't actually have to give you any services because you're not actually contracting them for anything because you're just donating to this monopoly. It's a non-starter in my view.
Yeah, like the cop who won't stop a crime. It's like, oh well, he doesn't have to. Like, well, fucking then I don't want to pay for that. Why would I pay for that? Like I've never in my life paid for anything where I'm just going to get a nebulous, oh, we'll protect you. Like, no. I want to know exactly what it is I'm getting, exactly what it is that you're rendering to me. And insurance does it perfectly. I want to insure my property for some amount, like this is Hoppa's idea. And, the insurance, work out how you're going to protect my property, but if you fail to protect it, then you've got to pay me out for the exact amount agreed upon. And then this insurance company's going to go, oh, geez, I guess we got to fucking protect it to the correct amount as well. They all
actually do our job, yeah.
Yeah, they all know how much to protect it. They all know, if I'm in a super low crime area, they'll know, okay, we probably don't need armed guards all over this block. We can just have somebody on standby who can get there quick enough to recover the items. And if, a fucking Ocean's 11 heist team comes in and takes my shit, then they're just going to have to pay out of pocket. I'll get my money back, right? Because we agreed to that. And insurance is just such a good way to deal with it, because it is an insurable good, first of all. Hoppa covers this. And second, insurance agencies, people don't understand how much capital insurance agencies have. They are gigantic. And that is in their cut down baby form, because they're contained by the state. Insurance agencies are able to do basically nothing. That's why people hate insurance so much, because the state has regulated it all. For health insurance, they have to cover pre-existing conditions, which is just, imagine I were to get fire insurance out of my house whilst it's burning down. What the hell? Of course, they're not going to be able to survive under this. And Tom Woods has a book on health insurance specifically where he goes over this type of thing. If we had proper free market insurance, they would be just insane assets. They would be way more powerful than the US military, way more powerful. And they would actually be nowhere to allocate those things. We've seen in some cases where, there's some amount of private defense allowed. Quasi-private at least. where the US government will contract out private contractors for things. You know, where the US government would take like 10 guys to land a helicopter, they'll do it with 3, right? It's just way cheaper because the US government doesn't know how to spend its money. It doesn't know these things. And that's why the US, like, people will just look at the US military budget and go like, who could ever deal with that? I mean, the fucking Vietnamese rice farmers dealt with it, and they didn't have economic calculation. Imagine somebody who has way more resources than the Vietnamese rice farmers and can actually do economic calculation. The US military has no chance against such a force. 0 chance at all.
How would an insurance company like identify if it's fraud or not? Like, let's say you insured your house for robbery. Like, what's stopping you from just transporting it to a friend's house and like just say I've got robbed?
Sure. So
Same way they do it now when you have issues like arson.
Yeah.
like insurance fraud is an actual
Like they
thing.
handle that today. They have actual investigators that handle that kind of thing today, and a lot of times it's determined in the contract that the investigators are third party, and then you also have third party arbitrators and stuff. But like people who will insure their houses against like fire or their businesses, happens a lot with businesses, and then burn their business down to try and get the insurance payouts. Sometimes they get away with it, but very often they're found to be guilty of arson.
Yeah, because again, these are like
okay.
private businesses, so they know where to spend. If somebody, you know, insures their like, you know, $1 million fucking Van Gogh painting, and then the next day, oh, I lost it, you know, pay me out. They're going to be investigating that heavily, right? They'll know where to do the investigations. And they'll be able to hire far better investigators than the state who'll just come in and get down on the ground, bang, 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 right? Which doesn't give them anything, right? It's the same, and like it's similar to the idea about pollution. Like there used to be an industry around forensic investigation for pollution, where they'd be able to track down the exact factory which a piece of soot came from, based on like the chemical composition of it, and they knew exactly where it came from. The state doesn't fucking have a clue, right? It's like that meme, you know, the state institutes an ass wiping program, and then in 10 years people are like, well, how the hell would we wipe our asses without the state? Or more in reality, it's like the two people standing in a Soviet bread line. One guy says to the other, oh my god, I can't believe we have to stand in hours every day for stale bread. The other guy turns to him, it's like, you think this is bad? In capitalist countries, they don't even have free bread, right? It's like we can't even conceive of what it would be like to pay for these things. Like I'm entirely convinced we would be conquering the stars right now if the state had never got involved. Like absolutely, we'd be conquering the fucking stars.
We also don't know how cheap it would be. Like you can look at the past for some of this stuff. Like there's I know there's a lot of people have looked into this, probably everybody in the chat at some point. But the idea of the mutual aid organization, right? You have these neighborhoods of, a lot of times it was in larger cities where you had a bunch of immigrants from one place, and they would open up this mutual aid organization, and it's everybody pays like a little bit if you can afford to. The other benefit of this, by the way, is that everybody who's part of it knows you. You're geographically central, so that your reputation is known among those people. So, for example, if you take advantage and don't pay, nobody fucking likes you. Like there's social consequences to that. But in any case, the Mutual Aid Society, it was super, super, super cheap for these really poor immigrant communities, because they could all pool resources and do things like hire a doctor that just works in their mutual aid society. They just work in their clubhouse. And if you need to go get, something for your sniffles, you go to that doctor and it's free because you pay a little bit. And it makes it really, really, really cheap. You can do stuff like that, not at scale in the sense of like having everybody as part of one of those things, but you can do those things at scale in that you can have a ton of those little organizations that can serve communities, even poor communities, with things like healthcare and stuff that they need.
Yeah, and this is like
people seem to forget that economies of scale isn't infinite.
One specific thing I remember from David T. Beto's book on this, which I included in my video on healthcare, was that in America, like the average rate you'd be paying for mutual aid was $2 a year for healthcare under the free market. And that was, you know, obviously there's inflation to be considered there. It was a day's wage for a laborer. That was how much it cost, right? You work for a day, and that was for your whole family. You work for a day, your family is covered on healthcare for a year. Like, these things are, in real terms, very, very cheap, right? It's very difficult to conceive of these things because we have just all
And they
this
still work
destruction.
today.
Yeah.
Like, there are still electric co-ops. When I was a kid living out in rural Oklahoma, we were on an electric co-op and a telecom co-op. And the way that these cooperatives work is it's just a mutual aid society where everybody in this rural region pools their resources, and now they have an electric company that they all sort of are referred to the quote unquote part owners of, right? And then at the end of the year, you get a dividend check for whatever the cash overrun is that the company had. And that's how that works. It's cheap, or at least no more expensive than a regular electric company would be. But it's not worth it for the big electric company to run power lines out to your rural homestead. So you and everybody else with a rural homestead in the area forms an electric company, and it's super affordable. It makes a lot of sense.
I have a question, I guess, for anybody who cares to answer. Something my anarcho-capitalist friend asks very frequently is basically, if NCAPism is so infinitely more efficient, why has some XYZ autonomous zone not just grown to take over the US in like a decade or something like that? The answer I've always given him was compounding interest, basically, how it takes too long of a time for that to exist. And also that most of these like autonomous zones are run by communists. But I guess, have any of y'all experienced a similar question?
So the reason why there isn't an anarcho-capitalist like free zone is because the philosophy of the day doesn't allow for it. Basically, if you have a philosophy which says that man is impotent, man can't know anything, he has to just obey the rule of the mystic elite. You simply, if people believe that, you cannot have freedom. And this ties in with Hoppe's analysis of, like, you need a certain amount of class consciousness to have freedom. And the second that class consciousness is achieved, it's there in an instant, right? The state can't do anything about it.
I've heard a term being thrown around a lot, which is reaching the remnant. Can you explain exactly what that means?
Sure. So basically, this is from an essay by Albert J. Nock called Isaiah's Job, where he goes over this story from the Bible of a guy called Isaiah who was told by God, hey, the collapse is coming. You need to teach people my message. And the people who understand your message, they will be saved. And the people who are capable of understanding the message, they're called the remnant. And they're out there, right? So what Isaiah did is he stood on his pulpit each day and he just said the word. He just said the good word every day, right? And most people, they were laughing at him, they were jeering him. This guy's crazy, look at him. What an idiot, right? But he kept going out there every single day. And eventually, you know, one guy in the audience would be like, he's kind of speaking the truth here. Then you get one convert, right? And then the next day, you know, a couple more people, he's speaking the truth here. He's speaking not to those people who are laughing and jeering at him. He didn't care, right? He's speaking to the people in the audience who are able to hear reason, who are able to hear the message and understand it and follow him. And the way this connects with libertarian proselytizing is seen very well in the Ron Paul campaign, where Ron Paul gets out there every day. He says the message of liberty. Most people think he's crazy. They think he's insane. They're unthinking. They do not matter for his theory, right? They do not matter for his strategy. They are irrelevant, right? What does matter is those people on the margin those people out there who are able to understand his message. He's speaking to them, right? And when he speaks to them, they understand. They join the vanguard, is the term in strategy theory, right? They start hacking at the roots of the tree of the state along with him. And maybe they start doing the same thing. They start also doing Isaiah's job. They start speaking the message, not caring about the retards who they cross, who go, but what about the roads? You know, they don't care about that. They just keep speaking the message every single day, and then they get some converts. And if they get a bigger mic, a bigger audience, then even if 1% of that audience is capable of understanding the message, then they've done their job. That is the idea. You don't compromise on your principles to appeal to the people who aren't capable of understanding you in the first place. You speak only to those who are capable of that. And that is all you need. And it really is all you need. We've seen this with Lenin, right? He took over with his Bolsheviks, the largest nation on earth. You know, we think about how would he do that? Maybe he won the most important elections of our time. No, that isn't what he did. What he did was he built up a minority within the political power. But this minority was highly trained, highly organized. They knew exactly what they were supposed to do, right? And they were dedicated. They were die-hard about this theory. And when the time came that General Kornilov wanted to oust the February government, the February government wasn't able to win on its own. And Lenin was like, hey, you know, if we back you, you can win quite easily, even though we have a minority of the power. And so the guy who ran the February government, I can't remember his name, he was a prime minister or something, he gave massive concessions to Lenin in order that Kornilov wouldn't win and reinstate the Tsar. These concessions included things like, you know, the proletariat could take over landed estates, you know, they would be armed, like all these different things. Like Lenin got his victory, not through trying to appeal to the people who weren't amenable to his message, but by appealing to those who were amenable to it and not compromising on his message.
Yeah, and I think there's a very good modern day example of this in Argentina, right? In Milei strategy.
Yeah.
I've seen a lot of like interviews, right, of people who were working right on that campaign or just like spreading that message, right? Because basically like he just brought it all to Argentina, right? He brought Rothbardianism, right? This message of liberty, right? And just like hating against the state, right? But he wasn't like appealing to like populism, right? He was just spreading, you know, the ideas and sticking by his principles, right? Calling everybody a parasite.
I mean, he loves Israel, though.
Yeah. But like what they were saying, right, is what really like turned the tide, right, was that they spread it in the universities, right? Like they got professors and people in university positions to spread it.
No. That's cool.
How principled do you guys think Millet is? I remember watching the video on Iceland and how it collapsed due to like small aspects of statism. What do you think will happen to Argentina? Are you optimistic or?
I mean, definitely.
I'm optimistic about it. Yeah.
We've gone in maybe 60 years from 18 people in Rothbard's living room to taking control of a large Western nation, right? 60 years we were able to do that. 60 more years, who fucking knows, right? Maybe we take control of the whole goddamn world, right? These things, once they start happening, they can happen really fast. And this is a very positive sign that an anarcho-capitalist who has accepted the remnant methodology the vanguard strategy. It's been borne out in history with Lenin, and now it's been borne out again with Millet. This is a very positive sign. Now, do I think Millet, like Argentina specifically, is going to become Afghanistan? Probably not. But we're getting there a lot faster than most people thought we'd get there.
Yeah. We need more people like you and Javier Millet.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I don't doubt, like, if Malay keeps, like, reducing the state, right? Reducing that, like, why can't Afghanistan just pop up in Argentina, right? Like, is the state gonna, Waco siege them, right? Like, why not?
Maybe.
What would be
Certainly.
required? What would be
Political
required
environment
for it
isn't-
to happen is for the philosophy to be in such a place that it could happen. Now, it might be the case that in the future, it becomes time for them to start speaking French as against German. Right now, Argentina is speaking German. They're doing things slow, steady, little by little. We're going to deregulate this industry. We're going to deregulate that one. It might come time that they have to start speaking French. When that opportunity arises, yeah, it could become Afghanistan in a matter of months.
Awesome.
Before you reach that point, though, there has to be broad acceptance, because you run into a situation where if you don't have a society that is willing, and this is something that I do think is very real and very important, and it happened in Nestor Makhno, even though he's a commie, and that's part of the reason that he wasn't able to stand up to the Soviets. But you have to have a society that's willing to defend that, because as soon as, let's just say it happened, right? Javier Milei signs the executive order that dissolves the very last part of the state. As soon as that happens, someone's knocking on your border. Someone wants you, and they will take you. And you have to have a society that's willing to fight and die for what you've built, what you have. And that's where the philosophy needs to be in a culture in order for it to last. If he makes Ancapistan, but nobody's willing to fight for Ancapistan, Ancapistan doesn't exist the next day. It's gone.
You need the private security and such, private military, probably, just in case.
Zulu,
Right.
Have you seen like that Malay speech that was translated to English with AI?
I have not. The one at the World Economic Forum.
Yeah. I'm saying, like, something like that. Maybe you should, translate some of your vids or your courses, right, into Spanish or Portuguese.
Sure, yeah, that's definitely a thing that I'm interested in doing, but I cannot afford a translator. Based on, like, well, I out of pocket, I could pay someone. But, like,
I'm sure some of us in the server would be down to help with that. Like, there's a lot of people who speak different languages in here.
Sure, I mean, if somebody wants to if people have come to me and asked to translate my courses and stuff before, I've been like, yeah, sure, go ahead. But, like, for me to coordinate such a thing, I would need to be having people on hand who can translate it, and, it would have to be such that I know that they're getting the correct concepts across. So I'd want multiple translators, probably. And if there's a discrepancy, figure it out. And that,
right,
based on how much my content makes, doesn't make sense.
Yeah, there is that one, I don't know if you've heard about this. There is that one student of Mises who is Japanese, right? He went to America. He took Mises classes for like a year, and then he went back to Japan and started translating all of like Austrian economics and stuff, and started spreading it there.
Yeah, that's a great thing.
Could that have been like one of the causes of why Japan had such a large economic boom? Not boom.
Well, no, probably not. There's not a lot of Misesians in Japan, but there's like a community, right? There's like they have positions in like some schools and stuff, and they teach it, right? They teach Austrian economics there.
Looking at Japan, even in like, the 1870s, what were they before Matthew Perry, introduced Westernization into Japan? They were some backwards Eastern nation that had absolutely no industry. But then when the intellectual floodlight gates were opened, they modernized, like that. In less than 20 years, they became a major superpower that had a modern industry. So the idea of intellectual dissemination being this kind of radical, contributing to this radical unseen growth is pretty valid.
Yeah, I mean, it's like we have Austrian economics, which is like, golden, right? It's like this shining light, right? But it's just Austrian economics by itself, it can't stand on its own, right? It has like Ren said in her critique of Austrian economics, like they don't even have a philosophy behind it, right? They try to use economics to replace philosophy, and you can't do that, right? Yeah, there has to be an integration with a rational, non-contradictory philosophy, right? To have a whole philosophy with this, shining light that is Austrian economics, that would spread like wildfire.
Yeah. This is what Zulu is doing.
Yeah. I mean, Zulu, you want to talk about your progress with your brain site?
Sure. So basically, at the moment, I'm just notating all of objectivism, the philosophy behind Rand. Once that's done, I can start integrating it with the legal theory that I've already worked out in the course that I've done, Fundamentals of Libertarian Ethics. And once there's a truly integrated, and I've written pieces before on the bridge between them, how you get to the NEP on objectivism, and how from the NEP, and my specific understanding of the NEP, that is, and how from the NEP you get to the rest of legal theory. That's all in place. But once it's there in a wiki form, then everything can be integrated. Any disintegration becomes obvious and can be ironed out. And once there's a fully integrated philosophy between objectivism and Austrian legal theory, both of those things are correct on their own. They just need to be stitched together, find out any inconsistencies, find out how we bring these two things into one unified whole. That is why I started the brain site.
Sounds awesome.
Do you think there's any specific issues that'll be more difficult to iron out?
Probably the biggest one is just getting to the non-aggression principle, but that's already been done by myself. The biggest one is probably value theory, but apparently Stratino's done some work on that. I haven't read his paper on it yet, but I will at some point.
Yeah, that paper is really good.
Yeah, so I mean, if we got the NEP and value theory down, and the action axiom is easy enough to go around in objectivism, because man has free will on objectivism. The rest of Austrian economics follows. You just need to sort of reframe what we're saying. We're not having these it's not an axiom. It's not like a precondition of thought or anything like that. That man acts. It's nothing Kantian, right? It's purely Aristotelian. I mean, Rothbard was an objectivist, so I mean, it's easy enough to get it, but he wasn't explicit because for some reason, right? So an explicit integration of Rothbard and Rand is what's required, and we've got all the pieces already.
Yeah, I think the biggest issue is like a lot of the language, right? Like in Austrian economics, rational is just means purposeful, and that's like it means something completely different in objective